things. Only human beings would have the faculty of language. And the faculty of language would not be the result of evolution by natural selection. Chomsky speculates that it probably would be something like a genetic mutation. And of course throws the ball into the court of microbiology, as he says that probably microbiology will tell us a lot more about the emergence of the faculty of language than history or paleontology or Darwinism.
Would they expect that another animal would improve also?
Yeah.
Well,
By mutation.
That would be really hard to
Through
happen,
genetic engineering.
For the second time, that's very difficult.
that's interesting.
Yeah.
Through genetic engineering, try after defining what genes are involved in the language faculty, you try to splice those genes into the genome of some other animal and see if the other animal begins to speak spontaneously. I think eventually that'll have to be a test made once, and if there are genes or a gene sequence is found. That's interesting. I mean, we're testing for various things, trying to make clones, well, okay, and then testing various types of plant species to see whether they resist such and such bug invasions. It doesn't seem to be completely outlandish to imagine that this might eventually be a test that would have to be done.
But I don't know, but I think that we have the faculty of language, and we also have, our brain has the ability and the possibility to use it. Maybe it would take a long time for an animal to have this put in their genome, and then to evolve the brain so that they could use it.
Right.
I don't know. I don't study science, but I think that it's not a matter of having that in your genome. It's a matter of even because you talk about not being able to use it is a problem. Not being able to use your universal grammar you're talking about.
It's pathological. If you can refer to a universal language as a human being, you are on a pathological level. But that was my impression.
Yeah.
Again, I might be totally off here.
I wonder if pathological is not too strong.
I'm just using, I mean, you are the one that used it for the
well, I agree with you.
I'm just parroting.
I want to agree with you.
One of my problems with this is that if you don't acquire a language, are you able to think then?
But that's kind of like the tree in a desert island metaphor. I mean,
if you don't
look, you know what? I won't say anything. Still too confused.
I mean, it brings you back to the Turing problem.
Yeah, it does. It does bring you back to the Turing problem, but I think that, to quote great professor Nitamar de Oliveira, I am not convinced. I mean, I am still not convinced on, I mean, I think what you're saying is very seductive, but I am not convinced on the hypothesis that we're not on a level of a very deterministic view of language here that is in the brain. And I am not sure if it matters whether or not it's evolved, or if it's mutation and that's the origin, if the origin of language is in a mutation, or if it is a result of evolution. I don't see why this matters. I mean, why should this matter for this discussion here? It's an honest question. I don't understand. I mean, first of all, I don't understand how Chomsky would be competent to make any statement about that. But on the other hand, why would it even matter? I mean, what's the difference?
Then you couldn't say I'm not convinced because it would be proven. Because then it would be a fact.
But look, regardless of it, I mean, regardless of the emergence of language being a fact within evolution or a strategy for adaptation, which I think is a very sound thesis, or just a ex nihilo mutation, you know, that happened without any causation, which is kind of weird. Most mutations are provoked by something else. So they are within the diagram of evolutionary biology in that sense. I don't understand why it would matter for the general physics, though. I mean, why? Why would that even be of a concern?
Well, but for philosophy, certainly matters. You know, because you know we have all the discussion about the rationality of this. Because they say that you know, life is something very rare in the universe. You know, and rational life is something that would be more rare. You know, it's still more rare. Then, you know, if you can discuss this kind of things and determine it's a kind of mutation, I mean, maybe you could have a clue about, you know, the way that the rationality exists and was formed in the universe. And it's a very important discussion in terms of philosophy, I think.
And maybe to discover when we and how we started talking is to discover how we started being rational.
Exactly, exactly. This is very important.
How we
And if
start
you are
being
unique or
rational.
not.
But see, if it is the
Oh,
result
rational.
of
Yeah,
a
and if you are
mutation,
unique or not, if there are other, you know, humans that.
But I think we're going,
rational.
we're skipping a few.
we're going off track.
A few hurdles. Because I think we have to remember that when Chomsky's speaking of language, of course, when Chomsky's speaking of language, he's speaking of universal grammar, so the syntactic structure, in addition to other components, as we see it. So this model, which is not the model of the way of the way a language is constructed in society. Moreover, I'm not sure if I can generalize this, but one of Chomsky's main claims is that the universal grammar produces sentences whose internal organization, or the internal organization of which is hierarchical and not linear. And another point, the universal grammar has the capacity of what he's now using this terminology a lot, which is merge. Meaning it has the possibility not only of creating externally a potentially infinite amount of sentences, but internally by substitution through pronouns or through clauses. And so this type of mechanism, which is something that a child acquires automatically, is of an extremely high degree of sophistication in terms of a system to be able to create from within itself through recursion, and this is, explains the chapters on recursion that we encountered in the first chapter of the Moro. A generation of sentences within sentences through the presence of the clause.
Presence of what, Professor?
The clause. Klausel.
Oh,
Clause.
okay. I just wanted to make sure I understood that. What is this?
So the clause, which is a phrase within a sentence that is subordinate to the main expression in the sentence, usually indicated by a that, triggered by a that in Portuguese. Okay, right? Okay. These are characteristics of the universal grammar that we find reproduced in language use, everyday language use. But what Chomsky is also saying is that this model, what this grammar points to, is the possibility of creating sophisticated sentences, a great diversity of sentences, not simply expressing oneself through the means of signs. Expressing oneself through the means of signs is something quite distributed amongst various organisms. Birds are able to do it, various types of mammals. Certainly the ants that keep invading my kitchen communicate very well when they see that I'm trying to exterminate them. This type of, it's not communication here that we're talking about. when Chomsky is speaking about language. So he's perfectly willing to accept that communication is a distributed, or perhaps plants communicate, you know, this type of thing. But it's the sophistication of this theory. So indeed, the question of thought, whether without the universal grammar, would there be thought? Well, Chomsky also says that the universal grammar seems to be very specific about the type of sentences it generates. Right? It's not specific to explain, for example, problem creation. So there might be some other faculty which could be called the science faculty or the science problem making faculty that is juxtaposed or connected or an offshoot or autonomous, as there perhaps is some type of creative productive capacity, producing objects for pleasure, artistic objects. But there he doesn't go anywhere into these. But he speculates that there seems to be an analogy made to the creation of grammar in arithmetic, but other types of mathematics would seem to belong to a problem solving, a scientific problem solving faculty that is not immediately, is not necessary to immediately reduce or to integrate into the faculty of language. So, to come to the question, would there be thought without the faculty of language? Well, there's intuition. The ball is thrown back to you people who want to have thought without intuition. What is a thought without a sentence or construct? I mean, how does a thought acquire its meaning? Last year we had an interesting discussion with Stéphane, in which I was still working with the Freudian model that, well, meaning is essentially generated from the organization of a proposition. There's no meaning outside of the propositional form, and it's intrinsically connected to the truth value of the proposition. But Stéphane was arguing in this point that there's a lexical dimension to the faculty of language in which there are a selection of terms. But these terms are not referential. This is a really important aspect to Chomsky's theory of semantic theory within the syntax. That we cannot assume that the terms of the lexicon refer in any given way, in any causal way, in any related way to the things that are in the world. What that relationship is something that perhaps is derivative and not primary in the constitution of this lexicon. The constitution of this lexicon, at best, is used to describe the creation of words. Presence of words. Now, there's a certain type of idea here that if we go back to looking at some of the distribution of languages on the planet, where we get similar words, sounds being distributed in an altering way, but seeming to come from a type of central focus, which would be closer and closer to Africa, where Homo sapiens seem to have emerged specifically. And there's some type of debate now about some skeletons found in Ireland, if I'm not mistaken, that they're claiming to be Homo sapiens and dating to be 100,000 years old. I think this is something that's open, because theoretically Homo sapiens sapien was not in Europe. There are no skeletal, apart from that one, no skeletal remains of Homo sapiens sapien. There's Neanderthal is in Europe dated at 100,000, but not sapiens sapien. So sapiens sapien seems to have emerged, and this is going to be, I imagine, the subject of tomorrow's lecture, which unfortunately I can't attend. But, you know, when does sapien become sapien? When does Homo become sapient? So there seems to be some type of move out of the African continent, which perhaps is the vehicle for the spreading of these lexical terms, which we call words, and whose origin, in terms of connectedness or not to things, is something that's clearly beyond our history to be able to reconstruct. But we ought to be careful to believe that there was some original baptism, like Kripke puts it, you know, that someone in Africa, first Homo sapiens, said, this is a chair, particularly as well. Of course, there's no chair. And afterward, when an artifact is created, it's a different story. But so whether this, Chomsky seems to reject the idea that there's some type of intrinsic connection between a word and what it refers to, what it denotes. And that its meaning, let's say, is acquired in terms of the position it occupies in a sentence. Because before we get to what a noun, substantivo, what a noun refers to, we have to deal with a whole series of other words. Prepositions, articles, verbs, and then the relationship within sentences between subject and object, predicate, subject, property, and subject, and then the adjectives that modify the subject. And so this possibility of words having special functions within a sentence is something that occurs through the mapping of the lexicon onto the syntactic structure. Okay. So that's why we also don't speak about words, to not mix things up, I believe, between some type of semantic intrusion into the syntactic claims being made here.
Okay. So I understand the computational dynamic that you're bringing up. And I think I understand most of it. I even understand the more, let's say, subtle understanding of the multiplicity within grammars in the plural, and how we are developing it then differently according to location and socialization and so on. But it's also, I mean, unless I am misunderstanding this whole thing, it's also true that even though there are grammars, grammar is a finite set of possibilities for sentence formation, right? We have a finite set, so in which we can form sentences within that set. Correct?
Sentences.
Yeah, it's a domain for formation. And this set seems to be determined physiologically in the mind-brain.
But what is the set? The mechanism, you mean, or
the set of rules, for example.
Oh, right, okay.
So we have a finite set of rules, both to organize, otherwise the possibilities for sentence formation would tend to infinite. So we organize them even in an arbitrary fashion by introducing rules of sentence formation. But also it seems to be in a non-arbitrary sense, just in a physiological sense, because our minds are not infinite, right? I mean, you gotta just stop it at some point. I mean, there's a limit to what we can do even with our mouths, right?
Right, absolutely.
But it seems that even the structure of this multiple ways of grammar formation seems to be given physiologically. Even the multiplicity seems to be determined physiologically. And once you determined the multiplicity of grammars physiologically in the mind brain, it seems to me that you are also determining the appropriation of grammar meaning physiologically. So it seems like a connected, step-by-step evolving in Chomsky here that goes from, sure, different languages use different words to refer to different objects and even constitute different objects differently according to location. But it's also true that some of them are first more successful in the ways that they are doing that because they are more organized and they are doing it more on track, let's say. They're more on track. And some are less on track.
That's in reference to a particular grammar.
I don't know. I think that's in
Not
reference
the
to a
universal-
universe.
no,
That's what I'm not
universal
sure.
grammar- The universal grammar works on track. After, if a particular externalization works according to its productive capacity, that's another question.
The universal grammar would be like the ability to connect the verbs and the nouns and things like that, and to make a phrase.
Fine, perfect. But you see, you're already using structures that many of us would say that they're not present in nature. I mean, verbs and nouns are not present in nature. But it's, I mean, some of us would claim that, but I don't think that's exactly it. I think what Chomsky seems to be indicating is that the structure of language in and of itself, the organizational structure of language is as true as our physiological organization. That's the entire point that I'm struggling with. And then I think I have a little bit of a difficulty here in understanding the variations within. Because it seems that some of the forms of asserting are just better than others for Chomsky. Or am I wrong on this? This is the point that I think I want to be clear on. I mean,
Well,
I'm thinking of truism here, Chomsky's truism, okay? That you have, that grammar operates, at least that's how I've always read Chomsky's truism, that grammar operates as a mechanism for truth iteration.
For truth
iteration. Yeah. And truth iteration is better as long as we are understanding the mechanism of language and the mechanism of the universal grammar better. In the same way that our understanding of our own physiology is better, our understanding of the body is better as we understand our own body better.
Absolutely, and that's why.
So this is a hardcore deterministic view. I mean, the one thing I am a little bit uncomfortable is that sometimes it seems that we're trying to indicate, oh no, there is some flexibility here. No way! This is a hardcore deterministic view, if that's the point.
No, but the point becomes, or the question becomes, where do we place the question of free choice or freedom? Do we place it as some type of entity within the mind-brain from which language emerges, and then who chooses when it's something common to all human beings? Or is it something that emerges as a function due to the specific nature of the universal grammar? Or due to the specific nature of the faculty of language, let's say. The faculty of language provides, in its productive capacity, a virtually infinite amount of possible combinations to be made from a certain number of phonemes. Now, phonetic structure, phonemes particularly, will indicate some type of boundary. This is the whole idea of parameter in Chomsky, because Chomsky no longer speaks in terms of rules. Right? The use of language is not to follow a rule, Chomsky. There are principles and parameters. He calls his approach principles and parameters approach, which is generally referred to in the Chomsky bibliography as the PISA lectures that are published in 1981 in a book called On on government and binding, which is not a political book, as it may appear initially. So the parameters, so the principles of the universal grammar, and like you're saying, okay, the task is to understand the production of sentences better. Let's take one assumption. Okay, sentences are created linearly and always following that structure, subject, verb, object. Okay, well, one of the things that Chomsky's research project necessitated immediately because of its universalist claims is the empirical groundwork, the empirical fieldwork. Getting a considerable number of researchers to see whether the apparently unconnected diversity of languages spoken by human beings are indeed distinct, or whether they can be brought back to some common model. And it seems that the claims made by the project are indeed pointing to the fact that they are an expression of multiplicity, of diversity, but enabled by the presence of the faculty of language that is theoretically or hypothetically composed of these elements of phonetic form, logical form, syntax, lexicon, and computational dynamic with a conceptual, intentional dimension included. Eventually, I think this is a question of whether this emerges with the functioning of the grammar. But once again, as Morrow points out, our problem with the universal grammar is to stop it, to catch a glimpse of it as it works, because it's a constant process. Right? So how to get a subsection, that's the basis of the two experiments he tries to set up, to see how the universal grammar will react to what is an impossible language, grammatically speaking. Okay, so coming back to the idea, okay, analyzing the universal, let's say, okay, well, sentences are constructed linearly. Well, we can see in other languages that we don't have that strict subject-verb-object order. And the analysis of Japanese is fundamental in this work, and Morrow points to it, where you have inverted sentence sequences. So, well, that means, it has to mean, that sentences are not constructed linearly. Well, how are sentences constructed? This is where the claim is made that sentences are constructed hierarchically. Hierarchically in the sense of the emergence within a sentence of various subdivisions in which there is a head, a specifier, and a complement that can be distributed all the way down the sentence. So there are special rules also to the subdivision. So in a noun phrase, for example, you'll always have a noun that occupies the position that's called the head of the phrase. The specifier will be to the left of it, the complement to the right. Little Mary from Arkansas. A sentence will probably have as its head, and this is the way the structuring goes in Chomsky, a tense phrase. Because there are verb phrases, but then there are the tense phrases, which is where really the meaning begins to be organized within the syntax, in terms of temporal allocation, in terms of conjugated.
Yeah, maybe it's easier if in Portuguese I think we say coração principal. Maybe it's easier.
Coração.
Oração principal. Maybe it's
Oração.
easier than tense, because tense is something that we have it. It's different in English. The verb tense and things like that. But in Portuguese call that oração principal.
All right, okay, well, that's interesting.
Yeah, like the main phrase.
Well, I thought oração was
Oração is the same as a
the
phrase.
utterance.
Oração
The
is like,
utterance.
no, oração is like a phrase with a verb. Each phrase with a verb is a oração.
Ah,
I think. Yeah.
okay, thanks for that. I'm focusing more on the readings, but yeah, I do encounter words, expressions, concepts in the Portuguese translations that I don't immediately identify. That's really good. And then so the verb phrase also will have a specific type of relationship between the head, which will be the verb, and then the components to the left or right in English of the verb phrase. Now there are some subordinate rules too that a verb phrase can have as a complement to the head a noun phrase. But it can't have as a complement a verb phrase. Or perhaps in English we can if we have the infinitive.
Because it would be another oração, because it would have like another set of things.
Yeah, let's say,
That's why.
I think in English, what we wouldn't be able to have is a tense phrase here. We'd be able perhaps to have a verb phrase insofar as we're able to use infinitives within sentences in a secondary role to the main conjugated verb. So I'm looking forward to seeing you. Well, seeing is a gerund, but its role is similar to that of an infinitive verb. Right? So you can have a verb form. I'm not sure also in terms of the terminology if gerunds are considered verb phrases or tense phrases. It's something to look up. O gerúndio, the gerund. Right? Yes?
No, it's just that the gerund has the same subject as the main phrase. That's why it can be in the same thing. And if you have another verb, sometimes you have another subject. That's why it's not connected.
The gerund would not be the head of a verb phrase? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I don't think so. I'm not sure. I don't.
And so there, I mean, these are some other phrases. There are other phrases like the preposition phrase, for example, the complement phrase. So I launched forward here into the book just to give us some type of representation of the type of mapping or diagrams we're speaking of, as characterizing the set of principles that then are parametrized when they are uttered through the phonetic form as a particular language. So Chomsky, in some sense, divides the idea of rule. On the one hand, there are the principles or the main concepts and categories. And then there are the parameters. What is possible, given a certain particular language, to have as a structure of a sentence.
I don't know. I could give an example of how that works. I don't know if I'm being too. I don't know if it would be really respectful to give us an example.
Sure,
but
please.
just
No,
I didn't
I'm
think
very
it was-
happy that there's this
Can I
much
give
interaction.
an example of the thing?
Sure, please do.
Please don't take.
You mind if I sit down?
No, it's just like this. You have like the same phrase in Portuguese and in English. It rained. No, yeah, it rained and not the camera. Okay. And so it's like this. Let me see how this is right in English.
This is a public seminar.
Okay. This one. This is TP. It's just that I don't know the name in English. TP. Okay.
Thank
you. Can I say it in Portuguese because
Sure.
then okay. A gente vai ter uma oração principal, okay?
Oh, everything, you're going to give the whole understanding. I don't know, you have to ask my
Yeah.
colleague,
bring it.
Professor.
I can say it in English.
Oh, go ahead, whatever you
Okay. Okay. Oh, maybe I'll keep in English. Okay. So, in English, you have to have the subject. You cannot just say and this is the verb phrase, right? You cannot just say rained, okay? You can't have nothing here. You have to say it rained. And in Portuguese, you have the this one, and then you have the NP, the noun phrase, and it can be nothing. It can be zero,
Right,
and it can be choveu.
okay.
Okay, so this is a parameter that is marked in English and not in Portuguese. I think
Right.
that's how we do this. I don't know if it helped, but I think that's how we do it in linguistics, to create these trees.
Right.
This is a different parameter.
So this was a response to Fabrizio's use of the word rule. Because if we're speaking of a determinism here, it's not a rule determinism. And I'm not even sure we're dealing with a determinism. Once again, I mean, no one is forcing my hand to move around, my arm to move around at this moment, and yet the principles and parameters of what I'm able to do with my arm are determined biologically. So this is why I believe Chomsky is able to give us such an unorthodox history and philosophy of science as well, because the terms that he's working with, due to the experimental and field-based verification of the model on the one hand, on the other hand, biological rooting in the brain of a computational dynamic formed by associating sound and logic in this idea of generative grammar, universal grammar. And being the very reason for which the conclusion would be, it is the very reason for which freedom and creativity are allowed. This is or produced. It's something that changes a little bit the dynamic that we're in philosophically when we speak more of an epistemological or ontological in the sense of analytic philosophy, an existential type of referential context. When we go back to Moro and here just to use another few minutes of discussion. I think, we can definitely, just to make a brief aside here regarding also Professor Nitamar's reading material, I think, this is really an ideal type of way we would like the course to go. Some knowledge of the text, prior reading of the text, and the ability to discuss along the presentation, not just have a presentation. So we're both really open to questions and contributions by you. This is postgraduate seminar. So the whole purpose of the first chapter, as Moro says, is what he presents is not a textbook of linguistics. He presents a whole series of notions of linguistics to set up our understanding of what is involved in the two experiments he's conducted. And like I was saying that, well, there's a question here in the experiments to verify how the unconscious universal grammar would react to languages that have impossible grammatical constructions. So how these experiments actually work is something that we'll see in the next time. But there's a lot of specification, a lot of specifications made that I think are useful to go through quickly. This hidden revolution in contemporary science is described as such because I think, you know, even us here working research philosophy, don't complete, well, consider this, let's say, consider this, I even hesitate to say fact, right? If this is really a discovery made by contemporary science, that the discovery that the number of possible grammars is not infinite and that their number is biologically limited, and therefore obeying, participating, something that you can call universal grammar. It's not that they are not infinite in terms of sheer numbers. They're not infinite because of the parameters and the constraints that are within the actual externalization process. So, in other words, you just can't make sentences and call it a grammar that mix up tense phrasal verb phrases with different heads and specifiers and complements and make use questions for declarative purposes and within a sentence the subordinate clause would be an expression. Perhaps in very specific cases you could do something like that, but certainly not in a generalized sense. So their number is biologically limited. So this relationship of language to biology is something within philosophy I think we're not at ease with, let's say. We don't recognize it immediately. And once again, I mean, we have to know what aspect of language. Chomsky will say pretty much in as many words in this book, The Science of Language, language does not exist. What we call language is composed of so many different elements that it doesn't exist. To speak of language as being the result of natural selection, of evolution by natural selection, according to the principles of Darwinian evolution theory, language would have to have been adapted to an environment and have had to, through its function, served a certain type of purpose to have been able to survive as a function within the human organism or within the animal organism. Chomsky's claim is, well, first of all, we don't really have a language in that sense, and it's hard to say that the complex sentences that we make have any type of specific or are a reaction to any type of specific environmental pressure that would make it more beneficial or not for a specific organism to survive or not. The fact that after, within the context of communities, and greater communities, and in the context of civilization particularly, language presents itself as particularly productive and particularly important, a function for survival and domination, is something that definitely we can reconstruct through history. But whether in nature, let's say, we can hypothetically think of being in the grasslands or in the caves, to formulate a sentence of the type, the rising of the sun today is a beautiful event. To have this type of capacity to speak, give some type of selective advantage, is not something that Chomsky goes along with. The emergence of a certain tool-making capacity, a certain type of group strategic thinking is a different story. Once again, group strategic thinking doesn't necessarily require sophisticated sentences that the Faculty of Language produces. All it requires is communication of someone. You hit the head, you put in the spear, you cut it apart. Okay, so we're multiplying context as well, and the cognitive neurosciences here that Morrow refers to is the multidisciplinary approach that is advocated by Chomsky as well, and particularly these days as we go into, as the generative grammar project goes into the minimalist program and into the area of biolinguistics. So if you read the book, you encountered, some of these little stories here that are now very, that have become the norm for neuroscience or neurophilosophy books. Phineas Gage gained immortality. In this book, we have the story of Monsieur Le Bon. Arrived at Bicêtre Hospital. He was a 21-year-old man who exhibited an unusual linguistic problem. Whenever he was asked a question, he would always answer by saying only one syllable, twice, tantan, in conjunction with quite varied intonation, expressive gestures, so on and so forth. He comes into contact with Broca, Dr. Broca, and then through Broca's analysis, we get the first pinpointing, the first localization of a possible section of the brain, the Broca section, which could be the source of language. But Morrow's argument, just like Chomsky's, will be that there is no, that the Broca section or surface does not give us anything really sizable in terms of a localization of the faculty of language. So his main publication of 1861, Loss of Speech, Chronic Softening, Partial Destruction of the Left Frontal Lobe of the Brain. So this is where the location would seem to be. Chomsky at MIT, Research Laboratory of Electronics, like Professor was speaking. Chomsky's father was already a linguist, specialist of Hebrew language. Chomsky also worked on Hebrew language. And, but in the 1950s, Chomsky really was involved with the rise of cybernetics. There's a relation, a link between recursion, of course, and feedback theory in Norbert Wiener's cybernetics writings and formulas. So there was a ubiquitous and overwhelming feeling around the board with the new insights of cybernetics and the newly developed techniques of information. The final breakthrough towards full understanding of the complexities of communication in the animal and the machine had been achieved. But Chomsky destroys the idea that the human mind works like a machine and that language is merely a sequence of rules regulated by statistical rule. In comes the idea of language acquisition. So, I mean, when we think about it, just to complete my thing, when we think about, okay, well, Chomsky destroys the idea that the human mind works like a machine. In other words, he destroys a certain type of determinism. Isn't that the type of the determinism, and should there be various types of determinism then? Isn't that the type of determinism that we want to get rid of? A determinism that arose or was updated and modernized in behaviorism. And of course, one of Chomsky's most important texts is an attack of Skinner's behaviorism. Is a determinism, let's say a biological determinism, which of course is not a word that he uses, that it accounts for the production of freedom and creativity and sees it as being a universal property of all human beings. Isn't that a type of determinism we might want to contemplate defending or exploring more? Would you like to say?
Só para saber se vocês acham que os cibernéticos daquele grupo Mason, da década de 70,
Yeah, there are two places, right? I don't remember the details now. Maybe Fabrizio could come, but I mean, there was the work that that emerged from Stanford, Palo Alto, right, California, and then there was the work being done on the East Coast. I think Wiener was going between the two coasts. I think Wiener had links to Palo Alto as well. But as far as I know, Chomsky's main point of work was at MIT. And there was always the interest in language from the beginning. It wasn't, Chomsky's work was not to create an artificial thinking machine, as opposed to what the other guys were doing.
Even Turner.
Even?
Turner's, the Turner experiment would be the artificial machine experiment.
Turing.
Yeah, Turing's experiment would be the artificial
Right.
machine experiment, right?
Right, exactly. But he definitely merged the interest. Okay, so this question of language acquisition, of course, is fundamental, because the argument is that children do not learn from their parents. We didn't mention, and it was nice that the term didn't come up of, oh, well, children simply imitate their parents. Well, then that creates a whole other thing to explain. I mean, how does this type of imitation go about? And it certainly doesn't make imitation less of an unconscious, automatic function, quite possibly an innate function, because the child doesn't learn how to imitate. It doesn't make it any less innate, less biological than the claim that a universal grammar or that a faculty of language develops very quickly within the child's life, and that it is the faculty of language that organizes this class. Yeah. Sure. We'll see each other at 2 o'clock. I don't know if certain somehow mentioned or not that we have the Aula Magna this afternoon at 2 p.m.
And it's not optional for students of the philosophy department.
2 o'clock.
2 o'clock.
Today?
Yeah. Okay.
Professor, there is an interesting point that we should find about this parroting example. I would try to find it online and send it to us. Oh, by the way, as Professor Norman was mentioning articles, I was finding them and sending it to your emails. Okay, so most of everything that was mentioned today, you will find it in your emails, Skinner's critique, everything else I made sure
Thank you very much.
The thing is, there is an article by Chomsky criticizing parroting techniques on teaching for the acquisition of language. It's a very interesting article where he analyzes techniques like some English courses, for example, they teach foreign languages by parroting,
Yep.
right? You just, I mean, if you've ever taken a course with Wizard, that's their method. No, it is, I'm not kidding. It is their method. It is a
That's
parrot
their magic.
technique. I mean, they confess to it. And it's interesting because it has a critique on the mechanicism of this approach, and I think it's an interesting critique to see the subtleties of his understanding of language acquisition. I mean, even against a more mechanicistic, because I don't think his critique is against determinism, I think his critique is against mechanicism.
Yeah.
I mean, when he takes his critique of the Cartesian substance model is on the mechanicism of that model, not necessarily on the deterministic features. I think he's okay with physiological determinism, but I think he's not okay with mechanicist determinism.
Yeah, well, he would probably say that, well, there's nothing to be okay or not okay about. That's simply how it is.
Yeah, and that again is a very deterministic view. I mean, when you say
Well, maybe that's a scientific view, and you know, as I
Fine,
said at the
but-
beginning of our lecture today, that, well, one of the questions here that is going to be reevaluated is the relationship between science and philosophy. I mean, as far as I see, what Chomsky is doing is philosophy, but of course,
He sees
it's
it as science.
And it's not philosophy, it's, of course, clearly it's science. But it's like, you know, we have like two, at one point there's this common stream, and then this stream sort of like doubles up, you know, as a mirroring or a shadowing effect. I mean, those who want to participate, and of course there are many philosophers afterward who will reject the restricted limitations that the scientific method imposes onto philosophy. Other philosophical directions will really exploit the restricted limitation, like analytic philosophers who will just focus on very, very tight contexts and not want to see anything on a bigger scale. But that was a certain period. So, you know, the question here is really, why aren't all the grammars that we can think of realized across the languages of the world? So once again, why aren't all the possibilities of sentence creation actualized, carried out in the languages of the world? And so Maura will begin to discuss why, based on what Chomsky has discovered, that not all forms in grammar are subject to rules. Okay? There's some things that can't be explained, however, by rule formation, such as passive forms, relativization, question forming, which involve a certain type of movement within, let's say, if we take a declarative statement to be the base statement, there is a type of movement that occurs within the sentence. So this type of, the analysis of this type of movement is called the trace theory. It's an attempt to establish a marker to determine what part, in fact, of the sentence moves. So in English we say, oh, okay, well, we create a sentence, okay, well, we create a question, we just invert the subject and the object and we have a question. Well, that works most of the time. There are some exceptions to that. It works most of the time. But how about questions that begin with who, what, where, when, why? What does who, what, where, when, why refer to the movement within, let's say, a sentence which is the answer? Or how does the movement after the question occur within the answer? What type of, is it a substitution? What happens to the WH form? So this is what requires what Chomsky calls the X-bar theory, which is these syntactic diagrams that we saw earlier on. Now, observations on phonetics, in English particularly, the N can be pronounced in different ways. Why is there a mother there all of a sudden? I wrote it down. There's no N in your mother. I don't know. I think it was an unconscious effect. I wanted to write something down and I wrote mother instead. She's been trying to write me emails and has been complaining about my silence. So S, seen and soon, okay, and penthouse and incapable. So we unconsciously make our pronunciation of a string of sounds easier by anticipating the articulation of one sound when we utter the preceding one. Yet again, a type of recursive phenomenon that Chomsky constantly relies upon to defend his claim that sentences are created or organized hierarchically and not linearly. So it's not, we don't create sentences like he went to the store. The store is a place where you can buy candy. Candy is of this type, M&M. So he went to the store which sells a certain type of candy that are M&Ms. Okay? So we don't have a linear construction. Whenever two words, so introducing definition here. Whenever two words with different meanings are exactly the same except for one sound in the same position, we call the two sounds that make the difference in meaning phonemes, and the pair of words a minimal pair. So we get some initial definitions. You know, we don't have time, and it's very, very technical to go into all of these little details, but I mean, they're the building blocks of the theory of universal grammar. The phonemes will then be the smallest linguistic unit into which the flow of speech will be segmented. Each phoneme can be seen as the sum of a series of primitive characteristics called distinctive features. And the fundamental discovery of the Prague School in the 1930s is that voicing cannot be expressed in isolation, but always occurs with other features. Roman Jakobson, all the features were defined for all the phonemes according to a binary scheme of presence, absence of a certain characteristic. We're right into structuralism here with these themes. And then we get a phonetic filter. The word filter is very important in the X-bar theory, to determine what is possible or not in terms of sentence construction. So a filter either allows or prohibits word formation from phonemes. And so we were saying that, well, the word is not defined. No, a word emerges from the production of phonemes. And what we have then in the universal grammar, or the faculty of language in real material terms, is not the creation of words per se, but of a series of sounds that after will be linked to what we identify as words. Now, this triggers an association immediately with the famous or infamous argument presented by Ferdinand de Saussure, that a sign is the arbitrary junction or connection between two sub-elements, a signifier and a signified. And so the differential aspect to this union is, or creates rather serious complications in establishing some type of direct relation between a word and a thing. Because we have a conceptual element and we have a phonetic element, a sound element, a conceptual element coming together. How do they come together? Why do they come together? Well, the claim made by Saussure is that there's an arbitrary union. So one of the most powerful natural filters that reduce the potential inventory of phoneme combinations is the syllable structure. The syllable always has a nucleus containing a vowel and up to 3 consonants before and 4 after. And working in English. And there are often references to the Italian given that
in English.
Pardon me?
That in English.
In English, yeah.
Polish, it's different.
Polish is different, but it's
In Portuguese too.
Polish.
How many?
We have 2 consonants before the vowel.
vowel,
Yeah, that's
maximum 2. Right.
PR,
All English. No more than.
not more than 2.
Well, how about
Then afterwards, only one.
an age combination?
Yes, CH.
No, but something like
2 consonants before and 1 after. Because even if we think like cachorro, it's like the R are separate.
I meant
with the separated
an H
syllables.
that creates a ye sound. Wouldn't there be some type of ye sound preceded
Yeah.
by another?
No,
another
because it
consonant?
would be another syllable, we separate it, and then, for example, cachorro, okay? There are 2 R's after the O,
Yeah.
but one of the R's is with the O before, and the other one is with the one after.
Okay.
We separate. It's different.
Okay. Well, in any case, as we can see, we have some limiting and combinatory parameters involved here, which can be called filters. Here, another filter, morphemes, smallest meaningful unit in a language, the same argument called free morphemes versus bound morphemes. And well, let's. Well, it's we've come full circle, really, dealing with questions that are very, very similar to Chomsky's questions. How do speakers know what they know if they're unable to explain what is it that we know when we know a language? At this point, we're going to stop here, and we'll pick up the rest of the presentation I have here, the construction of the model of the universal grammar. Will deal with the different types of properties, movement and localization, linearity, and so on and so forth. We'll need more time to go through that. And so next time, in 2 weeks' time, we'll deal with chapters 2 and 3. Chapter 2 describes the experiment in considerable detail, and chapter 3 is more speculative regarding a theory of mind that can come out. Chomsky's very polite, I think, in the foreword. He seems to have a very strong relationship to the Italian school, it certainly doesn't say that it doesn't lead to anything, but he doesn't say also that here we have a fantastic theory of the mind-brain. But it's also very modest in its ambitions. It deals with the question of impossible languages, or languages with impossible grammars, and using this as a tool to try to get a quick glimpse of this process that doesn't stop, which is the faculty of language.